Picture this. January 1945, somewhere in the frozen forests of eastern France. A German infantry company is advancing through the snow, supported by tanks, confident they're about to overrun a small group of American soldiers. They've got the numbers, they've got the armor, they've got every tactical advantage you could ask for. And then they see something that makes absolutely no sense. There's an American soldier, alone, standing on top of a burning tank destroyer, completely exposed, firing a machine gun directly at them like he's playing a video game on the easiest difficulty setting. The tank beneath him is literally on fire. It's loaded with ammunition and fuel that could explode at any second. Any rational human being would be running in the opposite direction. This guy is standing there mowing down German soldiers like he's got a personal vendetta against the entire Wehrmacht. The Germans throw everything they have at him. Infantry, machine guns, tank fire. For almost an hour, this one soldier holds his ground, killing Germans by the dozens. By the time it's over, he will have single-handedly stopped an attack that should have annihilated his unit. He will have killed or wounded so many enemy soldiers that the numbers sound made up. And the craziest part, this wasn't even close to the most insane thing he did during the war. This is the story of Audie Murphy, a scrawny kid from Texas who became the most decorated American soldier of World War II. And the day he proved that sometimes the most unbelievable war stories are the ones that actually happened. Let me set the scene properly, because the context matters here. By January 1945, the war in Europe was entering its final brutal phase. The Allies had broken out of Normandy, liberated Paris, and pushed the Germans back toward their own border. But the Wehrmacht wasn't finished yet. The Battle of the Bulge had just shown that the Germans could still launch devastating counterattacks. The fighting in the winter of 1945 was some of the most vicious of the entire war. The cold was murderous. Frostbite claimed almost as many casualties as enemy fire. And the Germans, knowing they were fighting for their survival, defended every village, every forest, every hill with desperate ferocity. Audie Murphy was a first lieutenant with the 3rd Infantry Division, part of the 7th Army pushing into the Alsace region of France. He was 20 years old, which sounds young until you realize he had been fighting continuously since the invasion of Sicily in 1943. In less than 2 years of combat, he had already been wounded twice, had already killed dozens of enemy soldiers, and had already earned enough medals to fill a display case. He was what the military calls a natural soldier, someone who seemed to have been born for combat, who could make split-second decisions under fire that kept him and his men alive while everyone around them was dying. But here's the thing about Audie Murphy that makes his story even more remarkable. He didn't look like a soldier. He was 5'5" and weighed about 110 pounds, soaking wet. When he first tried to enlist after Pearl Harbor, the Marines turned him down because he was too small and too young. The Navy turned him down. The paratroopers turned him down. Finally, the Army infantry accepted him, and even then, the officers tried to make him a cook because they didn't think he could handle combat. Murphy fought to get into a combat unit because he wanted to fight. He wanted to prove himself. He had grown up dirt poor in rural Texas, the son of sharecroppers, and he had something to prove to the world and to himself. Now let's talk about January 26, 1945, the day that would make Audie Murphy a legend. His unit, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment, was dug in near the town of Holzwihr in the Colmar Pocket, a bulge of German-held territory in the Alsace region that the Allies were trying to eliminate. The weather was miserable. Snow covered everything. The temperature was well below freezing, and German forces in the area were preparing a major counterattack to push the Americans back. Murphy's company was under strength. Like most American infantry companies at that point in the war, they had maybe 128 men when they should have had nearly 200. They were exhausted from weeks of continuous combat, and on the morning of January 26, they found themselves directly in the path of a German attack force that included at least 200 infantry soldiers and 6 tanks. Not Panzer IV or older models. These were late-war German tanks, including several tank destroyers armed with 75 mm guns that could punch through American armor at long range. The Americans had tank support too, but it wasn't much. Two M tank destroyers were assigned to support Murphy's company. The M10 was a decent vehicle, armed with a 3-inch gun that could handle most German armor if it got a good shot. But M10s weren't really tanks. They had thin armor, open tops, and were designed to move fast and hit hard, then retreat before the enemy could hit back. In a stand-up fight against German panzers at close range, they were vulnerable. The German attack began in the afternoon. Murphy and his men could see the enemy infantry moving through the woods, supported by the tanks. The American tank destroyers engaged, firing at the German armor. For a few minutes it looked like they might hold. Then everything went wrong. One of the M10s took a direct hit from a German tank and began to burn. The crew bailed out. The second M10 tried to maneuver but got stuck in a ditch, also taking fire. The American armored support was gone in minutes. Now put yourself in Murphy's position. You're in command of a company that's understrength and outgunned. Your armor support has just been destroyed. The enemy has tanks and you don't. They're advancing toward your position with enough force to overrun you completely. The sensible thing to do, the thing any tactical manual would tell you to do, is fall back. Preserve your force. Fight a delaying action while you retreat to a better position. Murphy ordered his men to pull back to prepared positions in the woods behind them. That was the right call. That's what any good officer would do. But here's where O.D. Murphy stopped being any good officer and started being a legend. As his men began to fall back, Murphy stayed behind. Not to cover their retreat with rifle fire from a protected position. Not to call in artillery. No. Murphy ran toward the knocked-out M10 tank destroyer that was still burning. The one that had just taken a direct hit, and whose crew had abandoned it because, it was on fire and full of ammunition that could explode at any moment. Murphy climbed onto the burning tank destroyer and manned the 50 caliber machine gun mounted on top. Let me make sure you understand what this means. The M10 was equipped with a Browning M250 caliber heavy machine gun on a ring mount near the turret. This was an anti-aircraft weapon primarily, but it could also be used against ground targets. Murphy grabbed this gun and started firing at the advancing Germans. He was completely exposed on top of a burning vehicle, with no cover whatsoever, with German infantry and tanks all shooting at him specifically, and he just started killing people. The 50 caliber machine gun is a devastating weapon. It fires rounds the size of your finger at a rate of over 500 per minute. At the ranges Murphy was engaging the Germans, it would cut through human bodies like they weren't there. The German infantry, advancing through the snow, were in the open, clearly visible against the white ground, and Murphy had a perfect field of fire. He started shooting, and Germans started dying. The German commanders must have been confused at first. Their attack was going well. They had knocked out the American armor. The American infantry was retreating. Victory was at hand. And then one man on a burning tank was suddenly killing their soldiers in job lots. They directed fire at Murphy, small arms, machine guns, 10 guns, everything they had. The tank destroyer he was standing on was hit by fire repeatedly. He kept shooting. Murphy's position on the M10 was tactically insane. He was the highest, most visible target on the battlefield. Every German soldier could see exactly where he was. But that position also gave him clear lines of fire in every direction. And the 50 caliber machine gun had the range and the power to reach out and touch anyone he could see. As long as the gun kept working, as long as the ammunition held out, as long as he stayed alive, Murphy could keep killing Germans. The attack went on for almost an hour. Think about that. For nearly 60 minutes, O.D. Murphy stood on a burning tank destroyer, completely exposed, firing a machine gun at an attacking German force. The tank below him was loaded with fuel and ammunition. At any moment, it could have exploded and killed him instantly. German tanks were firing at him with their main guns. Infantry were shooting at him with everything they had. And he didn't leave. He didn't take cover. He just kept killing. According to Murphy's Medal of Honor citation, during this action he killed or wounded approximately 50 German soldiers. Some accounts suggest the number was higher. The exact count doesn't really matter. What matters is that one man alone held off an entire German attack force long enough for his company to regroup and for reinforcements to arrive. The Germans eventually withdrew, their attack broken. And only then, after the enemy had pulled back, after his men were safe, after the battle was won, did Audie Murphy climb down from the burning tank destroyer. He was wounded. During the fighting, he had taken shrapnel in both legs. He hadn't stopped fighting because of that. He hadn't even mentioned it. When the medics finally got to him and asked how he was doing, he supposedly said he was fine. They had to point out that he was bleeding from multiple wounds. Murphy's response to being wounded was to refuse evacuation and instead lead a counterattack that pushed the Germans back even further, because of course he did. Now I need to stop here and address something, because if you're skeptical about this story, you should be. War produces a lot of legends, and legends have a tendency to grow with each telling. Soldiers exaggerate, reporters embellish, and sometimes things that sound impossible are just that, impossible. So how do we know Murphy's story is real? First, we have the official records. Murphy's Medal of Honor citation was based on eyewitness accounts from his fellow soldiers and officers. Multiple people saw what happened at Holzwihr. They provided written statements that were reviewed by military authorities before the medal was approved. This wasn't some tale Murphy told around the campfire. It was documented, verified, and confirmed by the chain of command. Second, we have Murphy's overall war record, which provides context for the Holzwihr action. The incident with the tank destroyer wasn't Murphy's first act of crazy bravery. It wasn't even his most reckless. Throughout his time in combat, Murphy repeatedly did things that should have gotten him killed. He charged machine gun nests alone. He crawled forward under fire to direct artillery on enemy positions. He stood in the open during firefights because he shot better when he wasn't hiding behind cover. Time and again he took risks that made no tactical sense, and time and again he came out alive while the people he was fighting died. Third, we have Murphy's own testimony. Unlike some war heroes who embellished their exploits, Murphy was famously modest about his achievements. When he wrote his autobiography, To Hell and Back, he actually downplayed many of his actions, making himself sound less heroic than the official records indicated. When the book was turned into a movie in 1955, Murphy played himself, and he insisted on toning down some scenes because he thought they made him look too good. This wasn't a man who was in the habit of exaggerating his accomplishments. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, we have the physics of the situation. The 50 caliber machine gun on an M10 tank destroyer was a real weapon with documented capabilities. The range, the rate of fire, the lethality against exposed infantry, all of this can be calculated. Given the position Murphy was in, the terrain he was defending, and the weapons he was using, the outcomes described in the official record are entirely plausible. He wasn't claiming to have done something impossible. He was claiming to have done something incredibly dangerous and incredibly effective, and the math checks out. So yes, the story is real. Audie Murphy really did stand on a burning tank destroyer for nearly an hour, firing a machine gun at German soldiers, and he really did kill or wound at least 50 of them. But here's what's even crazier. This wasn't the only time Murphy did something like this. Throughout his combat career, he repeatedly found himself in situations where most soldiers would have died, and he repeatedly came out on top. Let me tell you about some of his other exploits, because they help explain who Audie Murphy was and why he was capable of what he did at Holzwihr. Murphy saw his first combat in the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Within his first few days of fighting, he had already demonstrated an unusual aptitude for killing. During one patrol, he and the buddy encountered 2 Italian officers on horseback. Murphy shot them both before they could react. Cold, efficient, deadly. This was a 19-year-old kid who had never been in a war before, and he was already operating like a veteran assassin. As the 3rd Infantry Division fought its way through Sicily and then invaded mainland Italy, Murphy continued to distinguish himself. He had a gift for spotting the enemy before they spotted him. He moved through terrain like he had been born in it, and when the shooting started, he remained calm while everyone around him was panicking. By the time the Italian campaign was over, Murphy had already earned his first medal for bravery and been promoted to sergeant. The real test came in the invasion of southern France in August 1944 and the subsequent push toward Germany. Murphy's unit was in almost continuous combat for months. They fought through the French countryside. They liberated villages. They faced German counterattacks. and Murphy kept getting more and more dangerous. In one incident, Murphy charged a German machine gun position alone, killing the crew and capturing the gun. In another, he crawled forward under fire to mark German positions for artillery, then stayed in his exposed position to direct fire until the enemy was destroyed. In yet another, he led a patrol that stumbled into a much larger German force and managed to fight his way out while killing multiple enemy soldiers. Every time you think you heard the most extreme thing Murphy did, there's another story even crazier. By the fall of 1944, Murphy was a second lieutenant, having been promoted through the ranks based on pure battlefield performance. Officers who had served with him said he had an uncanny ability to read terrain and predict where the enemy would be. His men trusted him absolutely, because everyone who followed Murphy into battle seemed to come out alive, while everyone who fought against him seemed to die. He wasn't reckless in the sense of being careless. He was reckless in the sense of being willing to take risks that terrified everyone else, because he knew with some strange certainty that he would survive. The action at Holtzwihr was the climax of Murphy's combat career, but it wasn't the end. After being wounded and temporarily evacuated, he returned to duty and continued fighting until the German surrender in May 1945. By that point, he had earned every major combat medal the United States could give him, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Purple Hearts, and a bunch of others. He had been wounded 3 times. He had killed more enemy soldiers than anyone could accurately count, and he was still only 20 years old. Now let's talk about what made Audie Murphy different, because that's the question everyone asks about him. How did this scrawny kid from rural Texas become the most lethal soldier in the American army? How did he survive situations that killed everyone else? What was going on inside his head that made him capable of standing on a burning tank and shooting at an entire German attack force? Some of the answer is purely physical. Murphy had extraordinary eyesight and reflexes. He could spot movement at distances that other soldiers couldn't. He could react to threats faster than normal humans. In a combat environment where seeing the enemy first often meant killing them first, these physical advantages translated into survival. Some of the answer is psychological. Murphy grew up in extreme poverty. He had to hunt to feed his family from a young age. By the time he was a teenager, he had already spent thousands of hours in the woods with a rifle, learning to move quietly, to spot game, to shoot accurately. When he went to war, these skills transferred directly. The Germans he was fighting were, in some ways, just larger game animals that could shoot back. But there was something else going on with Murphy, something darker. In interviews after the war, he admitted that he didn't feel fear the way normal people do. In situations that should have triggered overwhelming terror, he felt a strange calm. He described combat as almost peaceful, a state where everything became clear and simple. Kill or be killed, move or die. There was no anxiety, no doubt, no hesitation, just action. This psychological state, which we might now recognize as a form of dissociation, probably saved Murphy's life repeatedly. Normal fear responses, the freezing, the panic, the hesitation, these got soldiers killed all the time. Murphy didn't have those responses, he just acted. And because he was acting rationally while everyone else was panicking, he tended to come out on top. But this psychological difference came with a cost. After the war, Murphy suffered from what we now call post-traumatic stress disorder. He had recurring nightmares about combat. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He struggled with gambling addiction and financial problems. He was married twice, and both marriages were troubled. The same psychological characteristics that made him deadly on the battlefield made him struggle in peacetime. Murphy was honest about these struggles in a way that was unusual for his era. At a time when PTSD wasn't even officially recognized as a condition, when most veterans were expected to just get over it and move on, Murphy spoke publicly about the mental wounds of combat. He advocated for better treatment of veterans with psychological problems. In doing so, he helped pave the way for the eventual recognition of PTSD as a legitimate medical condition. After the war, Murphy became a movie star. His autobiography, To Hell and Back, was a bestseller, and the film version starring Murphy himself was one of the highest-grossing movies of 1955. He appeared in dozens of westerns and war films throughout the 1950s and 1960s, becoming a recognizable face even to people who didn't know his military history. But acting was never really his passion. He drifted through Hollywood making money but never finding the peace he sought. Murphy died in 1971, at the age of 46, when the private plane he was traveling in crashed in Virginia. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His grave near the tomb of the unknown soldier is one of the most visited in the entire cemetery. Even in death, he remained a symbol of American military heroism. But let's go back to that day at Holtzweiler, because there's more to understand about what happened and why it mattered. When Murphy climbed onto that burning tank destroyer, he wasn't thinking about becoming a legend. He wasn't thinking about medals or glory. He was thinking about his men. The company he commanded was in trouble. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and about to be overrun. The conventional options, retreat and regroup, were the right calls, but they might not be enough. Someone needed to buy time. Someone needed to make the Germans pay such a high price for their attack that they would hesitate, slow down, give the Americans a chance. Murphy made himself that someone, not because he was ordered to, not because anyone expected him to, but because he saw what needed to be done and did it. This is what separates the truly exceptional soldiers from everyone else. It's not just courage, although Murphy certainly had that. It's not just skill, although Murphy had that too. It's the ability to see the whole battlefield, to understand what needs to happen, and to make yourself the instrument of that outcome, regardless of the personal cost. The German commanders at Holtzweiler had every reason to expect victory. They had superior numbers, superior firepower, and momentum on their side. What they didn't expect was a single man who was willing to die to stop them. One man who could shoot straight enough to make every bullet count. One man who was so crazy or so brave, they couldn't really tell which, that he would stand on a burning vehicle and fight them all. That's what broke the German attack. Not tactics, not superior weapons, just one man who refused to run. Now let's zoom out and consider what this story tells us about warfare and about human nature. First, it tells us that individual actions can matter enormously in combat. Modern military theory tends to focus on systems, on combined arms operations, on logistical superiority, on all the big picture factors that determine the outcomes of wars. These factors are important. Wars are won and lost based on industrial capacity, strategic planning, and organizational effectiveness. But at the tactical level, at the level of individual firefights and small unit actions, one person can still make an enormous difference. Audie Murphy at Holtzweiler changed the outcome of that battle. He saved his company. He killed dozens of enemy soldiers. He did things that no amount of strategic planning could have achieved. Second, this story tells us that heroism often looks like insanity from the outside. What Murphy did made no tactical sense by any conventional analysis. Climbing onto a burning tank, standing exposed while the enemy shoots at you, staying in position when you're wounded, these are not decisions that any military training would recommend. They are the decisions of someone who has moved beyond normal risk calculation into a different mode of operating. Whether we call this heroism or madness or something else entirely, it produces results that rational behavior cannot.